Okay, let's see.
Welcome.
Where are we?
Khenpo, can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Good. Welcome. Thank you for being here once again.
My pleasure. So maybe we should start as usual with the reciting refuge in bodhicitta. O sanje chedan sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dagi jinsogi besanam je drola penjer sanje drobar sho sanje chedan sogi chonam la Chancho bardo dani chapsum che dagi jinso kibe sanam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedang soge chonam la chancho bardo dani chapsum che dagi jinso kibe Sunam Jirola Penjir Zanje Drumbar Sho Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Chapsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Drola Penjir Sanje Drumbar Sho Sendren tamje dewa dan dewe judan dembrar jurche donga ji judan rawar jurche donga mebe dewa tamba tam mindrawar jurche Nirin chadan nitan rawe tanyan shembola nebra jurche. So now please think to yourselves that we must bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And that it is for this sake that we engage in translation of Dharma, and that we are studying the process of translation. And so with this attitude, please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta, or participate with this motivation of bodhicitta this morning, or this evening for most of you. Um, and let's see, last time we spoke quite a bit about poetry, verse. And so this time we're speaking a bit more about prose. Probably we should have started talking about prose before you start translating verse. And the reason for that is that when you have prose, you have fewer formal constraints. And when you're first starting translating, it's probably better to get a little bit of prose under your belt to get some experience working with prose first, because basically the issues that come up in dealing with prose also come up in poetry. But you don't have the added issues of dealing with verse and how to make the verse work. So it's actually a good idea, I think, to start by translating prose. And when you start out, it's good to do exercises and to pick little things, or maybe someone's going to give you something and say, here, translate this. And when someone gives you something, it's a good chance to try. And when you go back, after you've been translating for a few years, you'll go back and look at the things that you thought were great when you were beginning. And you look at them and say, no, that wasn't so good after all. It's okay. It's normal because it just takes time and it takes a lot of practice. So the more you do, the more practice you get now, the better it's going to eventually get. So you don't have to despair when everything comes out. In fact, when I do a translation, I always think of my first draft as being horrid, the horrid first draft. I just know that my first draft is generally going to need a lot of work. And so when I do a first draft of something and it comes out being dreadful, I'm not upset. I don't feel like, oh, I'm terrible. This is I don't get this text. And it's quite true that at that point I haven't got the text because my first draft shows the first draft is horrible. It shows that I haven't got it. But I'm not worried because you work through things and you go through it. And actually, as you go through then and you get more experience and figure out how to work things, then your drafts will get better. And the reason is that you'll begin to see how to take the structures of Tibetan and match them and bring them into your own language. When you're first doing it, you have to figure it out. Well, I've got this Tibetan sentence. So how am I going to bring this into French or Spanish or Portuguese? How is this going to work? How am I going to do this? And so there are a bunch of different levels that you have to look at in dealing with this. Now, the first one, and the one that I think that often we get fixated on, is the issue of terminology and what words to choose and how to basically, how do you pick the words? How do you pick equivalents for Dharma terms in English, in your own target language? What is a good word to use? And here you've got a variety of words. You've got terms that are specifically Dharma terms. You've got terms that are general words used in everyday language. And you've got terms that are used both ways, right? So you've got kind of loosely 3 different categories. Now, it's kind of a myth about Tibetan translation. When you read how the Sanskrit works, or when you hear about how the Sanskrit works were translated into Tibetan, people often talk about how the Tibetan Lotsawas are really good at matching the Sanskrit in the Tibetan. And it's almost like there is some sort of a mysterious one-to-one correspondence between the two. And so you think like there's one Sanskrit word and there's one Tibetan word that goes with it. This is what we hear when people talk to us. But when you look at the Sanskrit and the Tibetan side by side, you see that that is not exactly the case. There actually is a lot of flexibility in the Tibetan translations. And frankly, the ones that are the most readable and the most understandable are the ones that are not mechanical. So if you're going one word of Tibetan and take your word, let's pick, I don't know, Rikpa. And you're always going to say whatever you say. I don't know what you're going to say in French or Spanish or Portuguese. I'm going to say English, awareness. Rikpa always equals awareness. You're going to come to points where your sentence structure is going to have to twist in order to fit your word choice. In other words, you're going to come to places where that word has connotations that don't match the English word, the Tibetan word and the English word. They have different connotations. So Rikpa, for example, we've got the word Rikpa, and so in the Dzogchen context, you've got Rikpa. In the context of Tsema and Pramana or validity, you've got a very different meaning. It's just like knowing or being aware, right? So Sem, Rigpa, Lo, Dunchi, you've got these things. In Tibetan, we say that the Sem, Rigpa, Lo are all the same. And then there's the word lo, in Tibetan, Baladalana lo, Well, so you think about this, and there's a tendency to think that it always refers to the sixth mental consciousness. Well, actually, if you look at the texts in Tibetan, and not just the text on validity, which I've been working on, you see this in validity, but you also see this in the way of the Bodhisattva. There are at least 2 words that are translated into from Sanskrit into Tibetan with the word lo. There is the word buddhi, and there is the word diya, or is it deya? So that different the verbal verb di. So the buddhi can also be used for sensory awarenesses, which are not the sixth consciousness, right? So you have to be careful. You can't just say, okay, lo. People say that this is kind of more intellectual. Yes, in some instances, when it is translated, if it is a translation from Sanskrit, when it is translating the Sanskrit word di, yes, you can go there. Maybe not entirely. When it's translated the Sanskrit word buddhi, no, not necessarily. So you have to be careful. There is not a one-to-one correspondence from Tibetan to Sanskrit. In fact, we think of the Sanskrit words that we always know, like the words for the 5 skandhas. You've got rupa, vedana, samjana, samskara, vijnana, these 5, right? So the first one, rupa. Okay, rupa means form. And that in Tibetan is suk. So every time in Tibetan there is the word suk, there is the word rupa in Tibetan, in Sanskrit. And every time there's a word rupa in Sanskrit, it's always translated as suk. This is the idea that we're going to have, right? Well, okay, you start looking at Dignaga and Dharmakirti, and there's rupa, and it's translated as ngol. How did that happen? It's because the Sanskrit word has multiple meanings. And it's so it's translated into Tibetan as 2 different words or 3 different words sometimes, right? Sometimes you have multiple Sanskrit words that are translated as 1 Tibetan word. You've got the Tibetan word ngepa. So ngepa is an interesting one. In English, most people translate it as ascertain or something like that. Ngepa, actually it means the ascertain in English is the processing, ngepa is the result. So I often translate it with recognize. But it's not always recognize. It's not always. There are times in English where it's actually better to say ascertain. So I'm kind of flexible about it. The other thing is that when you look at what does the Tibetan word ngepa translate from Sanskrit, sometimes it's niyama, sometimes it's nishchaya, and there are a couple other ones. I don't remember them all. My Sanskrit is really not very good. I kind of look at things and use dictionaries and pretend that I know what I'm talking about. I don't, but I do know that there are 3 or 4 different terms that were translated from Tibetan or from Sanskrit into Tibetan with the same word ngepa. Not only that, those Sanskrit words, if you translate them into English, would you use different words? If you translate nishchaya into English, you could say ascertained or recognized. That's fine. If you're translating niyama from Sanskrit into English, you're going to be saying restricted or limited somehow. So very different meanings. Now, if you think about it in the Tibetan word ngepa actually does all of that work if you understand it. But you have to realize that it's not. So in other words, you can't just take this Tibetan word ngepa and say it means ascertained and that's it, nothing else. I'm always going to use ascertained for ngepa, or I'm always going to use recognize for ngepa. You're going to miss it. So it's important. Actually, why don't I try this? There's a, oh, that's good. I've got my right keyboard going. Okay. Where are we? I'm trying to do something on my, I want to, ngepa. Okay. So let me share my screen with you all here. So I'm going to take this is a dictionary app that someone gave to me, and I haven't figured out how to give it to anyone else. I'm happy to give it to you. Maybe Drupchen can help figure it out at some point. But I'm happy to share you the file that I have, but it'll come up as a file that you can't open, and it only works on Macintosh, as far as I know. There's the Tibetan dictionary tool on the iPhone, and the developer of that at one point started to work on making it into a Macintosh app, but they never released it. But someone I know got their hands on it and then added a whole bunch of dictionaries. And in them, so here you've got the Tsigze Chenmo. And I always, actually, this is kind of an aside, whenever I'm looking at my dictionary, I always look at the Tibetan dictionaries first. Don't look at the English dictionaries until you understand the Tibetan words. The English dictionaries are not a good guide to the basic meaning of the word. You have to learn the Tibetan well enough to look at the word. So, at any rate, so at the top I have the Tsigze Chenmo, and then there's the Munam, the Dzongkha. Then you've got all the English ones, which are like kind of strange. But here's the interesting one. So here, this is the Negi dictionary from going from Sanskrit into English. And I've got my wrong glasses on. That's why I can't see anything. Sorry. Oh, that's better. So here we've got Negi, and the first one is that here's one. It's Nishchitaya, right? This Nishchaya is here. That's Nishchaya. Oh, and it's making bigger. I didn't know I could do that on this dictionary. And then you've got Parinishchaya, which is kind of a related form. Vinishchaya is here, right? So you've got all these different ones. And then you've got to look at all these different words and quotations that can be translated as the Tibetan word ngepa. Niyama is in here someplace. I'm not exactly certain where. Niyama, here's niyama, right? So you've got all these different Sanskrit words that are translated into English or into Tibetan with one word. So you cannot, so for that reason, there are 2 points here. The first is that you should not always assume that the Tibetan word has only one meaning. That's the first one, and that's an important one. It takes a while. And secondly, it's kind of a corollary. You should not assume that you should always use the same word in your own language, even if it has the same meaning in Tibetan. Because there are contexts in our own languages where you would express the same meaning in different words, right? So you've got to, so that's kind of the first thing. It's like the words, there's not a one-to-one correspondence of words. We've got, I mean, when we're translating from Tibetan, in a sense, we've got 2 languages, Tibetan and I don't feel like using English anymore, and I don't speak Spanish, so I'm going to say Swahili. We've got English words and Swahili words, right? So there are a bunch, we've got Tibetan words and Swahili words, right? So now if you want to translate from Tibetan to Swahili, there's going to be like a huge web of connections between all of them, right? And then only if you kind of get kind of a feeling for those different connections and different feelings, then you can pick out the right word in your own language. So when you're translating into Swahili, then you are able to actually make it sound like real Swahili or real Spanish, real French, real Portuguese, real English. Because what we want, so we go back to what we spoke about 4 weeks ago, what we want is we want people to understand the text and get some feeling. If you get the feeling, then you get the meaning. So in order to give people the feeling, we have to pick the right words that are going to evoke the feeling. Now, this also, when we were speaking a couple of weeks ago, we were speaking about who is your audience. So, I've been working on the Seventh Karmapa Jasu's Ocean of Literature of Logic, which means that I also have to look at Dignaga and Dharmakirti. So let me just share another file. Where did I put it? I planned to do a single file with everything in it, but I just didn't get organized enough to do that today. So here we have a passage from Dignaga's Pramana Samuchaya, or Tsemakuntu, on the Compendium of Validity. And so at the top, we have the Tibetan translation. Now, for this, we don't really have the Sanskrit. We have fragments of the Sanskrit. And for this particular, this is from the first chapter, which is on perception. And there is a Sanskrit reconstruction of the Sanskrit, but it's not complete. And you also have two Tibetan versions. So it's a really difficult text on a different level, but we're going to leave that discussion aside. This text was translated into English in 1968 by Masaki Hattori, who's actually, I think he's Japanese originally, but he spent a long time studying at Harvard University in the United States, and his English is very good. There's no problem with his English per se. And then there may be other translations of this passage somewhere else, but I'm not aware of them. Maybe there's a fair amount of work on this chapter of Dignaga in particular. So this passage may also be translated in another work, but I haven't seen that. But I'm also doing it. I've done a draft of this whole chapter, which is kind of strange. I'm not sure if I'm translating it or rewriting it because it's so hard to tell what is actually Dignaga's words. At any rate, in this passage is one that's actually a little bit clearer, I think, in terms of the original. So we have the Tibetan, one of the two Tibetan translations here. I'm not going to bother you with a second. If you look down at the bottom here, at the bottom there is this, says 79 words, right? Do you see that? Where it says 79 words? Okay. So here is a passage from Hattori's translation, 1968. Now, who is Masaki Hattori translating for? He is translating for university academics, right? So when he's translating for university academics, what he's translating for, he's not really thinking about people getting feeling. He's thinking about people getting kind of a detailed understanding I don't know, whatever the academics are into. I got out of academia, years ago, and I only tangentially related to it now. I mean, I have some associations with academics, and I appreciate a lot of their work, but it's different. What they're looking for is different. And so they're writing for people who are academics, who have graduate degrees or are studying to get graduate degrees. And often when you're talking about the text on pramana, they don't call it validity, they call it pramana. Usually they use the Sanskrit word. They will, they're free to use they feel free to use a lot of really high philosophical words. Part of it is the nature of the text. You can't avoid it. You can't avoid it using heavy philosophy with Dignaga because of the nature of the text. You can't, but also, who are they writing for? Academics, right? So here, he says erroneous cognition, and so I translate in mine. I say confused cognition. He says erroneous cognition. Not a big deal, right? I mean, we can talk about terminology. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but what is the whole? How does he put it together? He has a very complicated sentences, and he spells things out really so he spells things out very specifically, sometimes more specifically than it is in the Tibetan translation. So as a result, Hattori's translation is 91 words. So it's, like what, a quarter longer. Now we could say that there are all these Sanskrit words here, right? This is another thing about the academic translation. They want you to know what they're talking about specifically. Whereas if you're translating for a different audience, you'd say, this is just going to confuse everyone, leave it out, right? So that's one thing to think about. That's the level that he's thinking about. Now, his translation of this is not bad. I don't think I disagree with him on the interpretation in any significant way here. But in my draft, here I had 72 words in the original, and I'm at 63. So this is one thing that I find is helpful for me, is to look at the word count of the passage and see, how close am I? Am I adding anything, right? This is a big problem in this. Or am I doing things more elaborately than need be? So when I look at I'm not going to say the Tibetan's the original. When I look at the Tibetan translation, which has its flaws, um, uh, it's fairly simple, or it's fairly concise. And so I feel like, well, it should also be the same in English, right? So I'm translating in that way. Now, and so this paragraph that I've translated here is not something that you can hand to an ordinary person and they're going to understand what you're doing, what you're saying. They're going to have no idea. You may be looking at this and saying, what is he talking about? What does this mean? And that's reasonable because we're talking about, what level are we talking about? On the other hand, my thought is I'm translating for people who are like serious Dharma students who want to study this, right? They want to study, they want to learn this material. So, I do in as straightforward language as I can, trying to be concise and trying to make it in good English and clear English. Um, so like here, an example of this is there's the Tibetan word here is mitju. I'm going to highlight it in red, if I can do that. Yeah, there's red. And Hattori says, mitju la sopa. I might as well do that whole phrase. So the mitju la sopa, Hattori translated as out of such things as water vapor floating over sand. Right? But you could also do it in English as just a mirage and so forth, right? So there are different ways you can look at it. So it's a difference in style. Who are you translating for? What are you translating for? What are the expectations of the audience? What do you want? So these are the things that you need to think about. This is why thinking about who are you translating for is so important. Now, I don't know all of you. There may be some people who are foolish enough to get into translating Dignaga, but I don't know how. I'm not necessarily going to recommend it right off. I think it's better to probably start with other texts first and get some translating experience under your foot. But I just wanted to show you that difference between the style. It's not a criticism of content. The content is fine in both, I hope. At least it's fine in Hattori's. I don't know about my own. I'm not going to disagree with him, right? So that's something to think about. Now the other, so we've been over that. There's the issue of what vocabulary you're going to choose, what sort of style of language you're going to choose. It's the first one is sort of like who's your audience. The second is thinking about what is the style that you're looking at. And so when you're looking at Dignaga, you're going to be talking about mirages and perceptions and apprehension and stuff like that, just because that's what Dignaga is talking about. But if you're probably more frequently going to be looking at things more like this text by Khenpo. Where is it? Here we go. Let's share that. Are you seeing that? What are you still seeing the Dignaga? No, you're seeing the Khenpo, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So this is just the opening of a Dharma talk by Khenpo. So here, let me just isolate these first paragraphs so you can see them better. We've got so when I work, what I like to do, this is just kind of a tip for a good way, or what I think is a good way to work. You get your Tibetan in Unicode, and you get it entered in your computer, hopefully, if you can. These days, we also can, do a little bit of OCR, the optical character recognition on Google. At any rate, you get your Tibetan, and I'm not going to go belabor that much. You put it in, and then I put the English in the next paragraph right after it. And this means that when I'm going through and editing, I can go back and look at the back and forth easily. So generally, this is how I work. That's just kind of a aside. Now, in terms of this, we're looking what this is. It's from a collection called A String of Pearls, a collection of Dharma talks. So these are talks that Gampo Pasin Rinchen gave to his students. So, many of you, I'm sure, know. Some of you might be from other lineages and not know as well. Gampopa went to, after leaving Milarepa and then spending many years in retreat, several years in retreat, he then went to the area of Dakla Gampo and founded and decided where Milarepa had told him to go. And Milarepa had told him to go there and gather students. Gampopa went there, and it's just this big, empty place. And he thought, how am I going to ever gather any students? But they came. And eventually he had thousands of meditators, thousands of students meditating in caves around the area. And also he had a monastery there. And so he would give Dharma talks at the monastery. The word Tsokchut, literally it's Dharma for the community. The word Tsokchut refers to talks that are given to a large group, teachings that are given to a large group, as opposed to teachings that are given to specific individuals. Okay, so I'm translating it here as Dharma talks. So here, if you look at the Tibetan, it's kind of a very kind of colloquial feeling. It's in very good literary Tibetan. It's got spelling is all right and everything is fine. There's nothing, there's no problem with it, but it's a little bit more of a literary, a folksy feeling. So you kind of feel like it's Gampopa speaking to you. Like, so it's like, as for the Dharma, I would like to share with you all. So here we've got this Tibetan phrase, Nyendu Sola, right? So it's like giving or offering to your ear, giving to your ears. So to put that into, so if I said that, now, so we could think, okay, if I want to write this in, so I'm doing my first draft, and what I'm going to do, okay. I got it into English, for all of you, in terms of the Dharma I want to share, to offer to your ears. Okay. I mean, you can already see my version of this below, but it's the Dharma I want to offer to your ears. I mean, does that make any sense in English? Not really. So in Tibetan, it's kind of a nice kind of polite way of saying, I'm trying to offer you. So in English, we'd say, I would like to share with you all, right? Right. And then in English, we have, different tense moves, verb moves, have conditional and so forth. And in French and Spanish, you have even more. And you confuse them. French, there's a sort of feel free the subjunctive. You should feel free to use the equivalent. You use your conditionals and so forth. They don't match into the Tibetan. They don't have. So you use. Sorry, I lost my connection there. Are we all back?
Yes, I was thinking it was an
okay. Okay, let me get that back. So basically what the point that I'm trying to make right here is that when you take the sentence and you translate it into your own language, you want to make it into natural language. So the offer to your ears, this is fine for your horrid first draft. And actually,
sorry, excuse me, we're seeing the compendium of validity. I don't know.
Oh, you are? Wrong one. Oh, where are we? Are you seeing, string of pearls? This is the one. I'm sending the wrong one. Okay. Now, are you seeing the string of pearls now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. This is why I should have put it all in just one document and shared a single document for the whole thing, but I got too lazy this week. So the way you work, so that's how do you work this? What is the procedure? It is the first time you go through, you put this down and you look and you reduce something. You may come up in your horrid first draft, you may come up with something like the Dharma I want to offer to your ears. In your horrid first draft, this is fine. And then your second draft might be something like you might be in terms of the Dharma, because you can always think of onduchena or ondugina, onduchepa. You can think of that in general as being like in terms of in English. And so there might be some equivalent in your own language. And so you start out kind of working with those stock terms that you have. I want to now you might go, I want to offer to your ears. So what does that mean? So I want to say to you, is that going to work? Well, maybe not. And then you go back and you can rework the sentence. And I went through a number of drafts and I haven't saved them, so I can't really show you all the different stages. But actually, I did spend a fair amount of time on this one sentence or on this clause to get it to the form that I eventually have in the end as far as the Dharma I would like to share with you all. So this is my kind of formal after sort of 5 or 6 different intermediate versions. So it takes time. You have to review and revise and edit things. But the whole point is that the end product should be something that sounds like you're speaking in English or Spanish, Portuguese, French, right? We want people to read it and say, ah, that's it. So that's that. Now, the other thing to look at is, like, if we look at the Tibetan here, we see that there are actually a bunch of, now, of course, you're looking at it for the first time, and I've seen it a bunch of times, although I haven't looked at it for a few months now. But if you can see, you can kind of tell from where are the shades. You can see that actually you've got a bunch of there. Like here's one clause. I can't say a sentence. You've got another sentence here. Another. So you've got, these are all fairly, or actually probably a sentence would go from here to here, like, right? So they're fairly short sentences. So in bringing it into English, I also did fairly short sentences. Like this first sentence, you've got the kind of introduction, and then you've got really the meat of the first sentence is this: to truly practice Dharma, it is important to first meditate on impermanence, right? And so forth. Those are all simple sentences. And they're about a similar length to the Tibetan sentences, because even when you're translating prose, it's important to think about the form of the original. If you're thinking about the form of the original, then you're going to be able to actually come closer to the feeling of the original, because what is it that because it's the form that helps create the feeling. If the original has lots of short sentences and you translate it in one long sentence, your translation is going to have a different feeling. If the original is one very, very long sentence and you translate it into 3 or 4 short sentences, then the feeling is going to be different. However, on that last one, sometimes in Tibetan, especially in Tibetan written in between like the 15th and the 19th centuries, and the written Tibetan from that period, the sentences can be extremely long. And sometimes you have no choice. Well, you do have, sometimes it's just a lot easier to break them up into 2. But you want to try to kind of recreate the feeling of the sentence, especially since Tibetan sentence structure is just different than Indo-European languages. So sometimes you do have to break a Tibetan sentence up. Sometimes you would have in English, the sentences don't necessarily overlap with the phrases in between she. So you have to be free about it. But in general, you want to try to match the feeling the structure, the feeling of the original in prose just as much as you want to do that in poetry, right? So this is important. And then, as I said before, you can always check yourself, because one of the things that the biggest problem is that we're going to do things, add extra things in. And the easiest way to give a rough idea of this, which is not 100% good way of telling it, but kind of a rough way, is to again look at the word count. So like here in this Tibetan, what is it? We've got down at the bottom, we've got these 169 words you see at the bottom, right? At the very bottom of the window. And then I had to select the English, we've got 157 words. So it's just a little bit less in the English as compared to the Tibetan. And so my experience with this is that this is just a rough guide for telling me, am I on the right track? Now, as I said on one of our earlier sessions, you can't necessarily say that this is going to be the same in your own language, because in French and in Spanish and Portuguese, you have a lot more articles and prepositions that you need to use. In French, you might have a few fewer because you've got a little bit more, you've got some contractions and so forth. So you need to work it out. But what you want to try to do is to try to make sure that you get everything in the original and translate it into good language without adding unnecessary things. Now, when we're thinking about adding text, one of the big problems we have is we think that it's not clear in the meaning is not clear. We think we don't trust the text. It's like we don't trust the text for being clear enough. And so there's often a feeling that this is talking about something that people don't know about. And if I just translate it into English or whatever language, people who are not in that context of Tibet aren't going to get it. So like there is one translator whom I know of who actually translates everything kind of like a little bit of a commentary. You put, a few words of Tibetan and a few words of, and then like, those few words plus an explanation, but not put it as if it were commentary. I was talking with, when they were doing the Treasury of Knowledge at the Tzadar Foundation, they're doing the ebooks on that. In one of the volumes of that, there was a passage where the translator had taken 2 sentences of Tibetan in a topic that people are not going to understand, that people have no familiarity with. And the translator decided that the best way to deal with this is to just write the explanation as if it were the translation. So he had like a big paragraph for 2 lines of Tibetan. So my feeling is that that's not the right approach. If people need explanation, you can use footnotes, or you can expect that my preference is actually is a few footnotes, but too many is just too much, you can expect that people are going to have to go to lamas, Khenpos, or whatever, and get some teachings on this material. And it's like the Tibetan masters, they're not just Tibetan masters, they are people who have realization and know what they want to say. They're authors who want to do this. They want to say what they want to say, what they mean. For example, if you take a look at translations of the German philosopher Wittgenstein, now he also spent a lot of time in England. So his English must have been quite good as well. But if you take a look at the translation of Wittgenstein's Tractatus into English, it's just as incomprehensible in English as it is in German. People could have looked at this and said, well, we're reading these words that Wittgenstein wrote, and we don't understand what they mean. But the German people would say, ja, aber wir wissen nicht das. Was ist die Meinung? We don't know what it means. My German's not very good either. I know a smattering of it. I know a smattering of a bunch of languages, but anyways. So if you can't understand it in the original, why should you understand it in the translation? So especially the more experience I have, the more important I see that it's important not to add, not to try to. If you're going to add a few footnotes here and there is fine, but you can actually online there's I could bore you with it, but I'm not going to. You could I should maybe I should if I had brought it up if I had already brought it up on screen I would do it. There's a translation of Wittgenstein on screen online where you can look at the German and the English pretty much right next to each other, and you can see that they didn't add anything, nothing. And I can't understand, because I haven't studied Wittgenstein. I don't know what he's talking about. So it's the same with Dharma. So why should we add more, right? There's that. On the other hand, you have to be willing to reorder things in order to make it, understandable in your own language. As a case in point, this very first clause in Tibetan of the Gampopa and the translation in English, right? It has to be something that's going to put it, because if you say, as far as the Dharma I'd like to offer to your ears, no one's going to get it, and people are going to throw away your translation. They're going to think this Buddhism is too hard. We don't want to deal with this stuff. So you feel free to change it and make it into your own language, preserve the meaning without trying to add too much to make it right. Now, the other area where we tend to add a lot is in picking our terms. And this is kind of going back to what I was speaking about at the beginning. Not only is it there's like not a one-to-one correspondence, when you're doing the terms, you have to remember that there are reasons why the Tibetan translators invented the terms that they did. For example, you've got the word kunchok sum. I think I spoke about this a few weeks when in our first meeting. Kunchok sum, so kunchok sum, and you don't remember. Anyways, so there's a Sanskrit word triratna, and you've got the Tibetan word kunchok sum. Now, there are good reasons why they said the kunchok. They're very good reasons. And there's a very good reason why they didn't use the word norbu or rinchen. And that is explained in Sita Rinpoche's Jajchen, Sita Jajchen, the text on the Sumta, the grammar. What Sita, I haven't looked at this for years, so maybe I'm wrong, maybe I've misremembered it, but what I remember from that text, and I haven't looked at it since 2004, what I remember Sita Rinpoche saying is that the reason why they couldn't just use the word Rinchen Sum or Rinpoche Sum is because in the Burn religion, they used the word Rinchen to refer to their god. And so if they just translated the meaning directly into Tibetan, it would get confused. And so they used a different term. And so they came up with the term kunchok sum. Now, when we're translating into our own languages, what are we going to say? Les trois joyaux, the three jewels, the three rare and sublime ones. Now, there are translators who do translate kunchok sum as the three rare and sublime ones. And there are times when you do these translations, and actually it can be really kind of, it can be touching. I remember one of the first times I read extracts from the King of Samadhi Sutras, the translator translated the Tibetan word Chomdende as the transcendent perfect conqueror. And I thought, wow. And so it really did have an effect on me. So there can be value to using the terms, but they're very, very long. And the other problem is this. When we're translating kunchok sum, if we say three rare and sublime ones, well, what about the translations that come from Pali? They're not going to say the three rare and sublime ones. They're going to say the three jewels. What about the translations coming from Chinese? They're just going to say the three jewels. So if we then take the Tibetan term, that there's a reason why they translated it that way, but that reason doesn't exist in English. We don't have boon gods, and we certainly don't call the Christian god jewel, or maybe they do, but it's not the common term. So we can use the word three jewels without getting confused with the Christian god in English, and probably in the Romance languages as well. So why not use the term that matches general Buddhism, right? So that's one thing. So what we're talking about, although we're translating Tibetan Buddhist texts, Buddhism is, one religion. If we have completely different terminologies for the Pali Canon, the Chinese, and the Tibetan, then it's all going to be like three different religions, when actually it's just three different flavors of one, right? So it's important that we keep that in mind. That's also an issue with the word, like the Tibetan word yeshe, which a lot of people in English translate as primordial wisdom. So my preference is to leave out the word primordial and just use wisdom, but then you have the problem of what to do to prajna, or the Tibetan shira. And my solution in English, after consulting with the Karmapa, is to use the word prajna, because we don't really have an exact match for that word in English. But you have to think about that. And in terms of using the terminology, in English, we tend to use a fair amount of Sanskrit words, a fair number of Sanskrit words in our Dharma terminology. That works in English. It may not be as acceptable in France, where you have l'Académie Française, which is so very, strict about you must use French words, even though they're all going to go spend the weekend someplace else, So you have to be careful about how accepting is your language about taking on loan words. All languages take on loan words to some degree, but some are more accepting than others. So you need to think about that, and think about what's in common use in your language. The point is, you want to use words, terminology that people are going to understand, that people are going to be able to connect with. They're going to feel in their heart. You want to use, and then the second thing is, you want to use terms that are not too long and difficult. For example, there's the Sanskrit dharmadhatu. Some people translate it as the basic space of phenomena. And in terms of the meaning, fine, sure, why not? But I either use the Sanskrit word, or sometimes I've kind of made up dharma. I translate the Tibetan chigi ing, the ing as expanse, and say the dharma expanse. And people seem to get it. People seem to understand what it means. So I often say that. It's one of the, there was a time when I think we thought we have to translate all the words into English and only use English terminology, which ended up being incomprehensible, except for the word dharma expanse. People get it. So you have to be careful. Sometimes using a foreign word is more understandable than using the word in your own language. Sometimes you have to be careful, like talking about sema, you've got the word yujin, right? You have a yud and yujin. So yud is the object that you know, and the yujin is the what perceives or has the object, right? So some people translate the yul as the object and the yujin very literally as the object possessor. You're wondering what possessed them to use that sort of word. You might just use the English word subject, right? So, and that means that we actually have to go back and we have to know our own traditions. We have to know the words that we use in our own language for these things, especially if you're going to start talking about the more esoteric, philosophical, higher level of discourse. You need to know what do they use for, what terms do people use in your own language for philosophical terms? And if you know that, then you're going to be able to get translations that are going to be more, what do you say, more communicative. So I think that is enough for this morning. Then I think we've got some time for questions. But before the questions, Starting on June 11th, I'm going to be giving my Abhidharma class, which you're all welcome to join. Just let me know and I can make sure to send you that. But from that point on, I'm going to be probably a little bit busy to do these talks. And since it's starting on June 11th, which is a Friday, 2 weeks from today, maybe it's better to do our next session a few days before that, maybe on the Wednesday of that week, maybe on June 9th or something like that. We can talk about that and figure out a good time for you all. Something in the few days before it would be better. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So have you all got any questions?
I have one.
Uh-huh.
In terms of trying to get out, not getting the words get too long and all of that, what's the process to kind of make them, or to find something that's shorter or easier to understand or anything? Because right now it's easy for me to come up with like a big chunk of words and all of that, but then how do you make it simpler?
Yeah. So what you do is you've got your horrid, this is kind of going into the process. You've got your horrid first draft where you put in all of your terrible long words, right? And then you sit down and you think, can I say this more simply? And you try to rewrite what you've got. And so you work through that enough times. So when you're first doing it, it's going to take you more time to get through because you haven't got as much experience. That's just how it goes. So you sit down, you write your horrid first draft, and you say, well, what is the real meaning of this? What does it really mean? And how do I say that in Spanish? Right? I assume you're translating to Spanish, right? Or maybe Portuguese. I have trouble telling
Spanish.
which. Spanish, yeah.
Spanish.
Right. So when you're translating to Spanish, how do I say this more simply in Spanish? If I were going to say this to my friends in Spanish, what would I say? Now, if I were going to put this in a written form, because what you're going to say to your friends is something that you can't really write because it's spoken language. If you put it on the paper exactly, so it's just not going to fly. Then how do you make that in good written language? That's the first thing. And then the second thing, if you find yourself with an awkward sentence that's just not working, that's kind of big and unwieldy words, and you can't get it into something simpler, look at the Tibetan again because you probably have misunderstood something or haven't completely understood something. If you completely understand the Tibetan, it's just going to go right there. So this is, again, a level of experience. If you don't understand it at first, that's entirely normal. It's not a problem. You just got to keep thinking about it. Maybe there's some other connotation to this word that you need to think about. And if you think about it, then you can, okay, so that's how it is. And bring it around and work it around. Now, when you do this, you might get it wrong. So you have to be careful about that. But you have to look and say, what can I do to make this more you just have to go through a lot of process of editing, basically. And the more you do it, the easier it will get.
Thank you very much, Antala.
I have a question that is related to this. And it is that when we start first translating, we have the temptation of saying, okay, let's say the complement is put at the beginning in Tibetan. So in my translation, I'm going to keep that at the beginning of my sentence as well. So
yeah.
we have this temptation of keeping the word order, or if not the word order, at least the order of the chunks as they're presented.
Oh, yeah.
And so it looks like we need to kind of, I ended up, and I still end up doing that quite a lot when I try to translate, which I don't do so often by written. But when I do, then I end up with sentences that people tell me, wow, that's not really French. It's not really, It's something. It looks like Tibetan in French words, but it's not really French. And so how do you go beyond that? How do you go from this very horrendous first draft, because it's too close to Tibetan, to something that is easy to hear and sounds like if it was said in target language?
Yeah.
And how much freedom do we have in that?
There's a lot of flexibility. Flexibility or freedom, I'm not sure which. There's probably a bit of both. You've got a lot of freedom and responsibility in that you don't want to go too far. I just had a sentence I was working on before we did this that was kind of like that. Where is it? Oh, and I do want to bore you with that sentence. At any rate, what you have to do is you have to take your sentence and say, is this good French? You have to be able to look at it and criticize yourself and say, does this actually sound like French? If I submitted this to l'Académie Française, would they revolt and just throw me out? Or what? You have to, maybe not l'Académie Française, but you've got to then take it. So you have to, in particular with the word order, you have to be free. Yeah, I know exactly. I'll show you the sentence. It's going to take me a moment to get it. And it's again about an esoteric topic. Sorry about that. Here we go. Let me close that one. And now I've got it open. Now I've got it back. Got to sharing the screen. And find out which one it is. There it is. Okay. Oops. Is that the right? Where's that window? There we are. So you're seeing the this one with a little bit of Sanskrit on top, the Dharmakirti. This is actually, so here this is a selection from the Paramana Vinishchaya, the ascertainment of validity, and the sentence in question is this one that I've just put in bold. Do you see? So my previous version was this, and I have to move my microphone out of the way. I hope you can still hear me. At that time, the absence of something, and this is still faculties. Okay, so this is like an earlier, I don't think it was exactly this, but it's kind of this whole process. So here here's the Sanskrit is here, but I'm not going to bore you with that. In the Tibetan, this is the what is it? Oops, that was the wrong one. Where do I go? Anyway, that's the Tibetan that I have there, that last one. So here, if you do it literally, at that time, so the say yang, I haven't got that yang in there, have I? Then the so actually, in order to translate this, it has to go backwards into English. And so I've done enough of this that I just kind of did it automatically. It's the absence of something apprehended by such faculties. That Tibetan that's there is this English. Then at the end, the part that I changed around is you got this yupa nido at the end. Yupa nido. So yupa, it means kind of existence or there, but here we're not talking about ontological existence. So we're talking about presence or absence in English. So I'm using present in this draft. I may go back and revisit this, but I said is solely present. Is solely present. So this is the literal translation, but it doesn't quite make sense in English, right? So, but if you put it in this way, at that time, there is indeed the absence of something apprehended by such faculties. Then it goes. So it's like moving this yupinido, right? That in Tibetan and Sanskrit is at the end. So in the Tibetan, it's yupinido, and in Sanskrit, it says astyeva, and putting it up at the beginning, right? So you have to do that. So here we've got there is indeed moving it. So this is, I mean, not, what do we say? This is probably not the most easy of examples to look at because we're talking about, non-observation and so forth. But at any rate, this is showing the process you have to go. You have to move it. I mean, if you do this sentence, the one that I just typed in, this is the level that you're talking about, where people say, well, it's kind of English, but it's not really. You don't get it. And so if you just move that one other step of putting it in the front, then it becomes English. So you have to be free to do that. Okay. Nerea, did you have a question? I saw you had your microphone, your mute off.
Yeah, I was thinking this is exactly one. There is the presence of the the present is absent, or is you're changing the presence for absence, which make it more simple in English.
Oh, it was taking the yupa,
Yeah.
and I've got yupa and mepa. This whole passage is talking about the evidence of non-observation, mimita. So this is, if you've studied any Tari, then you know, and I think you've studied a little bit, so you know a little bit. Yupa, and this, you prove if you're proving that there is no jug on a table, are you proving the non-existence of a jug? You're proving the absence of a jug in English. If you say the non-existence of a jug in English, it has a whole layer of ontological, like jugs are more like rabbit horns. But we're not. We're saying that there's just no jug on that table. It's absent. It's absent there, right? So in English, if you say the Tibetan word mepa, and probably the Sanskrit asti nasti, probably has a greater range than the Tibetan than in English exists. Exist in English is a very, very heavy word. So again, that's a level of taking that Tibetan word and saying, okay, in English, we have to use two different levels. Are we looking at an ontological question? Then it's exist. Are we talking about the jug on the table? Then present and absent makes more sense.
I was having another question earlier as you were. It's about the Dharma text in Tibetan. There is the feeling that there is this more levels. You're saying you don't need to explain everything, but sometimes it's even difficult to grasp what is not just facts. I'm going to the kitchen, I'm drinking this.
Yeah.
We're looking at these texts where I find it very difficult to translate because I feel I don't grasp all the meaning of the Dharma text.
Right.
Like it's very deep. So it is very difficult to give a translation with a choice when you feel you don't, when there's no grasping of the content of the
exactly
text.
So you have to study. There's no other way around it. You have to study. You have to get the when you're doing philosophical texts, then you need to study. When you're doing practice texts, then you should do some practice. Because if you don't have a feeling for it, I was speaking with a few years ago. I remember a number of years ago, I was talking with a translator, Sean Price. You probably know him from Choephel, many of you. Good translator, good guy. At any rate, he was saying that when he's asked to translate a text, he likes to do translate a practice. He likes to do the practice first. And I think it's really helpful. Because when you actually sit down and do the practice, like someone says, oh yeah, we need to have the green Tara for our center. And if you know about green Tara and you did it every once in a while, but you don't really know the text, it's not going to work. You won't have any feeling for it. So you've got to do the practice. If you're doing the Ngundro texts, you should at least have done the Ngundro practices first. If you are doing or you should try to do it. Even if you can't do the full practice, if you can at least spend a few days with it. And similar, when you're doing like a Dharma text, you've got to have some meaning. If they're talking about, you've got some feeling for the meaning. So if they're talking about, like a Kadampa master is talking about impermanence, if you don't have any feeling for impermanence, it's going to be hard. You've also got to understand the meaning, what they're talking about. If you're talking about philosophical topics, you need to understand the philosophical topics. Otherwise, you're going to get just no idea what's going on. So you have to study. You have to study and practice.
Now we are lucky we have a Khenpo we can ask questions to. So that solves a lot of it. It helps. But it's still the feeling that, you know, there is a lot to be known before really being able to translate.
There is, but also you can remember that there's a lot of opportunity to learn as you translate.
Yeah.
And they'll make you, people will give you projects before you're ready. You won't be able to say no. And so at that point, you'll get to do your learning. So I think for our next time, what we should do is we should take a simple short text and kind of go through a process, just brief, right? So that's what we'll do for next time.
Great.
And I should get the text ready for you and send it to you in a few days. I'll send it to Drupchen, and then we will do that. I've got a text in mind, actually. So we'll do it. Not all of the text, we'll just do a short portion. Maybe we should do 2 more meetings before my Abhidharma class. Maybe we should meet next week, not Friday next week. I'm not sure that Friday is going to work, but another day next week. And then maybe sometime, like Wednesday of the following week, like Wednesday the 9th or Tuesday the 8th, something, one of those 2 days. And what we can do is this. We will go through, I'll kind of give you a little demonstration of what I go through on this short passage in English, and you all can do it in whatever language you like. And if you do it in one of the Romance languages, I'll have some ability to understand a little bit of what you're saying, but not fully. But that's okay. The point is for you to go through the process, and then we can talk about how is it for you in trying to do it. Okay?
Great.
All right. So we'll talk about timing later. So let's now dedicate the virtue of discussing translation so that all sentient beings may be able to hear and understand the Dharma, that it may be able to help them, bring them all to the state of complete and perfect Buddhahood. O sanam di tamje sikpani topne nipe janam pamche ne kega nache balong chupai sibe zole drogun dro shom. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.